to hold me tight whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream.
Life, it is always living, even when we are not, always enduring like time behind a ticking clock. There are no clear beginnings and no end, just simple continuation. However, we are a kind who will wait for joy to bestow upon us a life worth living, and we seem to always be in pursuit of the instant delights, believing our deterioration is detrimental. But little do we know, because even though our hearts are not always beating, our brains not always thinking, life will always be living, not always on show. The night drifted through the windows, creeping across the paint, rooting into the corners of every wall, and smothering the carpet into darkness. It was time. Zala would begin her ritual, which had come to be the evening's compensation for the shortfall in her previous appointments. She placed her throbbing, heavy head onto her nested pillows, and let her body drip into the mattress, her limbs baking within the gentle cushion of her quilt. As usual, there was a great weight on her chest that eventually bled into her arms, fingers, stomach, and then legs. Her feet, however, remained at an unkind chill, unconsciously detached. The echo of her grandfather clock crooned from the hallway, and from that, what once was a tangled mind was now one in hypnotic state. At first, sometimes it can take a little while for the dreams to find her and cradle her into sleep. But they do, and whether good or bad, she is always grateful for their time together, however brief they may be. "1:58 a.m. A screech strikes deep into Zala's head, bringing forth a great swell of red-hot terror that burns from her core. Gasping, she drags her still thickened body up from the mattress in a desperate attempt to heave her limbs into a protective fold around her. The back of her neck is soaked with sweat, the stench steaming up from when she rolls herself from the pillows it drained into. Eventually, she gains enough feeling and enough control to pull her body up the bed, bringing her once dangling free feet back into the nest of her covers. Itchy and damp with sweat, sickeningly dissimilar to the usual icy dead weights she puts up with at the ends of her legs. There are now two options. Does she wrap herself up in the comfort of her fear, enforce with 15-tog duvet, and surrender to another chance at sleep? Or does she throw herself out into the kitchen to be refreshed with a glass of chilled, sweet chocolate milk? The kitchen was only 2 doors away, and there was nothing quite as satisfying for her overheated fear than the taste of sweet chocolate milk. How good it would feel to touch the chilled glass upon her lips and pour the cool velvet liquid against her parched, bitter tongue. The lining of her mouth tingled and juiced at the thought. To feel that release would have been heavenly, if it wasn't for the fact she had already closed her eyes, swiftly swaying herself out of anxiety and into another, sleeping slumber. "2:36 a.m. Zala's eyes widened to find her head has fallen down from her pillows, and her body tangled within the quilt she would hide in, her legs exposed, and her ankles balancing on the edge of the mattress. There was no immediate panic that controlled her this time, but there was a calm acceptance of detachment. With a slight twist of her neck, her bold eyes scouted the room. The faded net curtains gently danced to a nighttime breeze, gracefully overlapping the jewellery stand that sat upon the chest of drawers next to the window. She moved past it and continued to look around. Her bedroom door creaked, stealing her attention. It was ajar, and shining through it was a dusty hint at the hallway nightlight. So concerned as she was at hearing her door move, she failed to notice the gangly shadow with two eyes watching her from the foot of her bed. Her body came over with a painful chill, and she gained the movement to tuck herself back in before once again falling swiftly into the arms of slumber. The bedroom door clicked to a close. The shadow edged closer. "2:54 a.m. She shot open her eyes, this time alert with a heart filled with adrenaline. Her quilt, mangled at the top of her bed, her legs dangling off the mattress, bare and open to the breeze that tingled the room around her. She was diagonally sprawled out on her back across the bed, her hands above her head, exposed. She twisted and wriggled, hoping with each flinch she would gain enough strength to haul her body to a standing position. But unfortunately the movement was only ever imagined. Her body lay still, and so very, very quiet. Her eyes would stretch to view the secrets that usually hide within the cracks of the walls. Towering above her, two glowing, grey orbs glared into her own eyes, presented to her by the gawky black shadow. With no life in her limbs, and no energy to focus on bringing it, she fixed her focus on the night watcher creeping closer. A cold calm curved its way across her still body as an icy blanket. Not a sound could be found unsettling the room, except for the continual clacking clunks of the old wood clock. Time had continued to pass, and unaware of the motions, Zala was too transfixed to notice a beat. Her right hand had drifted off and out to the side, resting softly on the edge of her cushion. Skulking sluggishly from underneath the frame, a black mist coiled itself over the bed and thickened into a figure no bigger than the shadow of a child's. It curled into itself before quietly resting around her outspread arm, easing into a weighty attachment. It cuddled her and held her tight. Moments passed. The burden of her uninvited guest had finally transformed what was an unflinching body into one tingling from the burning sensation of limited blood flow and pressed nerves. Her sight now released from her other shadowed sitter, she turned her head to gaze upon the little visitor embracing her stolen limb. Don't do that, she whispered. Her eyes filled with a pool of tears. They trickled down her face, dampening her spiral hair and tickling into her ears. A swell of anguish boiled from deep within her. Her mouth dropped to release the scream which pelted from her soul. The shadow dissolved into the air, and her gawky watcher, nowhere to be found. She flings herself off the bed, scrambling so not to touch the floor with anything other than her feet. But they're so numb she doesn't quite know where she's placing them. All she knows is the light needs to turn on, and it needs to turn on now. Breathless, but she made it. The room ignites into an overbearing torch, her eyes cringing at the offence. She takes her time to adjust and scan the room, avoiding direct contact with the empty chasm that is the underneath of her bed. It's okay. It's okay. She is her own safety blanket in the middle of the night, too old for a mother to be near, and too young to be coddled by a consistent partner. But these are the hours where wishing for independence had turned into loneliness, where the night's moon illuminates the darkness in her painful truth. Her bedroom door, now closed, glows dimly around its edges. She quickly pulls it open and follows it through towards the kitchen, hitting on each major light as she goes, the sticky, rough tang in her mouth leading the way to the fridge. A delayed shadow, not quite in tune with her pace, catches her eye in the reflection of one of the kitchen windows. Her heart thuds a little harder. A cold sweat prickles her forehead. There is a hefty round glass still drying on the rack. That will do. She wipes the edges with her sleeve. From the fridge, she pulls out an already opened carton of chocolate milk and pours to the rim. She gulps it down swiftly before emptying the remains and guzzling down the rest. Sweet, sweet chocolate milk. The glass, now chilled down from the briefness of its contents, rests upon Zala's head as she tries to ease the headache scratching at her skull. She throws the empty carton back in the fridge and places the glass in the sink. As quickly as she entered, Zala scooted back off into her bedroom in the same manner, hitting the lights on her exit. Sitting upon the counter, his legs bundled into his chest, the little shadowed creature leans over, then slowly pushes the fridge to a complete close. It is now 3:55 a.m., another early morning wake from another disturbed sleep. Her anxiety arriving and leaving in waves, reliving the same storm each night. Although it isn't quite as easy as it used to be. Her bed is an unkempt mess. She fluffs up her pillows, rewraps her sheets, and straightens out her duvet. She closes her door and closes her window, checking both of them twice before moving on to herself. She tidies her pajamas and fixes her hair. Then finally, she turns off the light and nestles back into her bed, ensuring her feet are tightly tucked in. It takes 2 minutes for her eyes to be closed, her body to melt, and sleep to become her. They say it can take many minutes, sometimes hours, to fall deep enough into sleep where your body starts to heal and your mind becomes active in imagination. For Zala, it has appeared especially recently that this kind of sleep comes easier than most, although her doctors might argue otherwise. However, what is actually the case, not even the most educated would understand. And although she's easily roused sometimes, she's not always able to bring her physicality with her. Being well rested in her bed comes as a gift sought after several times a night. Although conscious of the inability to stay in comfort for more than a few hours, it has never stopped the desire and hope that one day it may be more than just a fleeting visit. Occasionally, though, she wishes it for her ending memory. As she finds herself swept inside her mind's conversations, and her body sheltered within the dough of her bed's cushioning, her hands loosely place themselves by her head, and her legs gently relax open with a slight bend to the knee. Silence once again preserves the room. The creased top right corner of her duvet gets tugged by one inconceivable movement, and gradually it peels down, sliding over her, firstly revealing her arm, then her chest, before gliding down to her legs, entirely exposing one side of her sound body. Her gawky sitter observed from the darkened corner of the room. Like a spike had just been speared through her gut, Zala retches and shovels in the breath that bolted from her lungs. She peers downwards, locking sight at the red-clawed hand gripping onto the sheet below her. In one flash, the great paw snatches at her leg, ripping its claws into her flesh and grasping tight on her ankle. The beast launches her into the wall at the end of the bed. She has no time to scream, to even conceive the pain from her torn calf, her body bundled on the floor, bewildered. Then she turns her head. Blood oozes down her cheek and floods into her mouth. The pounding from her wound makes a hasty intrusion. She glances to the darkness under her bed. The beast snarls, revealing a mouth overfilled with daggered teeth, dripping in blood and reeking of rotting flesh. His arms arched, claws speared into the carpet. His black, marbled eyes burn into her soul as he strikes for her legs and rips her across the floor and into his pit under the bed. Her shrieks manage to pierce the wall for only a second before being cut into nothing. "4:45 a.m. The presence of sunrise gently teases the air, although its true glow would not come about for another few hours. This was the morning's time to prepare. The doves began to coo, initiating nature's dance to their English song. Zala, laying perfectly still, had spread herself out across the mattress and even though a sweat dampened the back of her neck, her skin was ice cold. Her quilt no longer cuddled her body, and appeared to be flung to the floor in a moment of restlessness. The rhythm of her chest swelled and exhaled gracefully. Her heartbeat matched the ticking of her grandfather clock. However early the morning liked to open its eyes, it was never enough to wipe out the darkness that resided in the night. The sun never overstepped its boundaries, so until it was allowed to shine, the night-sitters always used their time. Two glowing eyes that seemed to permanently be transfixed upon her crawled out from the corner of her room and hovered close by. Zala nuzzles softly into her supporting pillow, and the gawky shadow tilts its head, inquiring at the mist snuggled into her arm. The figure was quaint and clearly in need of her contact. To be so close that they might get to touch a human soul. Now, wouldn't that be something? As her bedroom door softly eases open, it allows entry for two more darkened spirits. They brought with them a sense of sadness, loss, and obsession. Ultimately, they were compelled by their incessant need to feed from the energy of the living. One skulks down next to her, spreading themselves on the open arm, opposite to the other tiny visitor. The other drifts up between her legs, pushing them further open. Its arms glide over her stomach and breasts, pushing up and partially unbuttoning her pajama top. It is here, upon her bosom. He rests his head, and occasionally pulls out his arm to stroke her face. Depression weighs down the air. It is suffocating, passive, and at the same time all too intoxicating. As though the promised reality of death was harmless and welcoming. No pain to ever be felt or thought. No fear. Just a thick, quilted blanket cradling you from one realm deep into the next. Desolation pressed into her every pore. She lay as her own white flag, burning from their burdens. As time ticked gradually on, so did her shadows. The closer the sun came, the lower they sunk, and eventually melted into her, where she absorbed their blackened misery. Her gangly watcher, however, simply hovered near, slowly backing up into the cracks of the walls, his eyes always peering down as a persistent witness. He twisted and slithered his neck as he pondered the resting room. Disguised by the dark pictures of the bed frame, the outline of an unnerving figure tucked himself away. For now, there is no more time to stay, so the shadowed watcher turned to the light and dissolved into the wall. From the foot of the bed, the demon's hand emerged, crawling with his claws, stretching out each rigid finger until it caressed the pulsing flesh. He grips a hold of her ankle and slowly tugs